In 2013, Detroit became the largest city in the United States to declare bankruptcy.
For the once proud motor city, it's the ultimate humiliation.
Many people may say this is the lowest point in Detroit's history.
It was the lowest point in a decades-long collapse that had seemed to have no bottom. At its peak in 1950, Detroit was home to 1.8 million people, the fourth largest city in America, one of the wealthiest cities in the world, and the undisputed capital of the global automobile industry. By 2013, that population had fallen to just over 680,000. Entire neighborhoods had been abandoned. Thousands of buildings sat empty and crumbling. The city couldn't even afford to keep its streetlights on, and the municipal government was $18 billion in debt. To most of the world, Detroit had become a symbol of everything that could go wrong with an American city. But something unexpected has been happening since then, slowly and in ways that most people outside the city haven't noticed yet. Detroit has been coming back. Neighborhoods that were written off as lost are seeing new investment. Iconic buildings that sat abandoned for decades, like the Michigan Central Station, Book Tower, and the David Whitney Building, have all been restored. Rail transit along Woodward Avenue has been reintroduced for the first time in decades in the form of the Q Line. For the first time in decades, people are moving back into a city that spent 50 years losing them. And the new generation of residents, businesses, and developers are betting on a future that not long ago seemed impossible. It's one of the most surprising urban stories in America right now. But to understand why this revival means so much, and how remarkably it actually is, we first need to understand how Detroit got here in the first place. Detroit was founded by French colonists in 1701, and its location between the Great Lakes made it strategically important for trade, shipping, and military control. It was officially incorporated as an American city in 1815. For much of its early history, Detroit remained relatively modest in size. However, everything changed heading into the 20th century, all thanks to one industry: the automobile. Companies like Ford Motor Company, General Motors, and Chrysler transformed the city into the manufacturing center of the modern world. Henry Ford's introduction of the moving assembly line in 1913 revolutionized industrial production, allowing cars to be built faster and cheaper than ever before. And as automobile ownership exploded across America, Detroit exploded with it. Factories stretched for miles across the city. Workers arrived from Canada, the South, and Europe, drawn by the promise of stable industrial jobs and some of the highest manufacturing wages in the country. In 1914, Henry Ford announced the groundbreaking $5 per day minimum wage for his employees. It might not sound like much today, but it gave birth to something entirely new in the US: a true industrial middle class. Factory workers could now afford homes, appliances, and even the very cars they were building, while supporting entire families. Between 1900 and 1930 alone, Detroit's population increased nearly sixfold, making it the fourth largest city in the country. At its peak, Detroit was actually the wealthiest city in the entire world. Its architecture reflected that prosperity. It had grand boulevards, ornate theaters, world-class museums, and some of the most impressive Art Deco architecture anywhere in the country. But the same industry that built Detroit would eventually begin to tear it apart. The first cracks appeared after World War II. As highways expanded and car ownership became universal, white middle-class families began leaving the city for the suburbs. This process, known as white flight, was accelerating across America, but in Detroit it was particularly devastating. Between 1950 and 1980, the city lost more than 600,000 residents, gutting its tax base and leaving entire neighborhoods without the population needed to sustain local businesses, schools, and services. The auto industry's decline made everything worse. Through the 1970s and 80s, foreign competition from Japan and Germany began eroding the dominance of Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler. Factories that had employed tens of thousands of workers were downsized or closed entirely. The jobs that had drawn generations of families to Detroit began disappearing. And unlike cities with diversified economies, Detroit had almost nothing to fall back on. By the 1990s and 2000s, the scale of abandonment had become almost incomprehensible. At its peak, Detroit had over 350,000 individual parcels of land. By the mid-2000s, 1/3, or an estimated 40 square miles of the city, an area as large as Paris, had been abandoned. Entire blocks sat empty, with houses stripped of their copper pipes and left to collapse. The Packard plant, once one of the most sophisticated automobile factories in the world, sat as a 3.5 million square foot ruin in the middle of the city. And downtown Detroit, which had once been one of the great urban centers of America, had lost so many businesses and residents that it functioned more like a ghost town than a city center. And then came 2013. The bankruptcy filing was both a crisis and, in a strange way, a turning point. It forced the city to confront the full scale of its problems in a way that years of gradual decline had allowed politicians to avoid. Debts were restructured, city services were reorganized, and for the first time in decades, there was at least the possibility of starting fresh. A large part of what happened next can actually be traced to one person, Dan Gilbert, the founder of rocket companies, because in the early 2010s, he relocated his company's headquarters from the suburbs back into downtown Detroit, bringing thousands of employees with him. And then he kept going. Over the following decade, Gilbert's company Bedrock acquired and renovated more than 100 buildings in downtown and midtown Detroit, investing billions of dollars in a city that most investors had written off entirely. The effect was catalytic. Other businesses followed. Restaurants, bars, and retail began filling streets that had been empty for decades. Property values that had collapsed to almost nothing even began recovering. Because of this, people began actually moving to the city again. As you can see in this graph, after decades of losing population, its decline slowed down dramatically from 2010 onwards. It has actually been in a net positive since 2023. One of the most symbolic examples of Detroit's revival is the Michigan Central Station. For decades, the building stood abandoned and covered in graffiti, becoming one of the most recognizable symbols of Detroit's collapse. But after years of restoration, it reopened in 2024 as part of a new technology and mobility campus led by Ford Motor Company. And it wasn't the only one. Book Tower, one of the city's most iconic skyscrapers, reopened after a massive $300 million restoration project. The long-abandoned David Whitney building was transformed into apartments and a hotel. Public spaces like the Riverwalk and Campus Martius were redesigned and expanded, helping bring life back into downtown. Detroit's revival can even be seen in something as simple as public transit. In 2017, the city opened the Q Line, a 3.3-mile modern streetcar running along Woodward Avenue between downtown and midtown. On paper, it's relatively small, especially compared to transit systems in larger cities. Critics have pointed out that its ridership remains modest and that it functions more as a circulator than a true mass transit system, which is true. But even if it isn't perfect, it's still a signal that investment has returned to the city after years of decline. Outside of the central areas, the city has also been working to address the tens of thousands of abandoned structures that still cover large portions of Detroit. Through the Detroit Land Bank Authority, the city has demolished thousands of dangerous structures while simultaneously working to put salvageable properties back into productive use. It's slow and expensive work, but the scale of demolition and rehabilitation over the past decade has meaningfully changed the physical landscape of many neighborhoods. The city's economy has also been quietly diversifying in recent years. The most significant shift has been happening within the auto industry itself. Ford and General Motors, the same companies whose decline triggered Detroit's collapse, are now making some of the largest investments in electric vehicle manufacturing in American history, and much of that investment is centered in the Detroit region. Ford's Rogue Electric Vehicle Center in Dearborn, General Motors' Factory Zero in Detroit and Hamtramck, and the wave of battery and component suppliers establishing operations across the region represent a fundamental reinvention of the industry that built the city. Beyond the auto industry, Detroit has been developing a genuine technology and startup ecosystem. The city now has a growing concentration of mobility and autonomous vehicle companies drawn by the region's deep engineering talent pool and its proximity to the auto industry. Companies working on everything from electric vehicle software to urban logistics have established operations in Detroit, Attracted by cheap real estate, strong technical universities, and a city government actively courting new investment. But despite all of the improvements, the full picture is more complicated. Downtown Detroit and Midtown together cover only a small fraction of the city's total land area, and beyond those neighborhoods, the picture looks very different. Its population is still only a third of its 1950 peak, making large parts of the city severely underpopulated and deeply distressed. Poverty rates are among the highest of any major American city. Crime, while improved from its peak, still significantly exceeds national averages. Many neighborhoods outside the central revival zone continue to lose population and struggle with blight, inadequate city services, and a lack of basic amenities. The revival has also raised difficult questions about who it actually benefits. As downtown property values have risen and new residents have moved in, longtime Detroiters, many of whom stayed through the worst years of decline, have faced rising rents and displacement pressures. The city that spent decades losing people is now seeing parts of itself become unaffordable to the people who never left. The challenges that remain are enormous, and the distance between downtown's revival and the rest of the city is a gap that will take decades to close. But the trajectory has changed, and for a city that spent 50 years moving in only one direction, that change is everything. Detroit isn't back, but for the first time in a very long time, it's moving forward. Thank you for watching.